This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and today is Wednesday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to take a look at Minotaurs. I've looked at a lot of creature types in this series over the years, but there's still plenty that I haven't gotten around to, including Minotaurs. Minotaurs were one of the game's very first creature types, making their debut in Alpha, and they were also one of the first creature types to receive significant support, with 1995's Homelands including the first cards that paid you off for having lots of Minotaurs in your deck. There hasn't ever really been a Minotaur deck that did well in competitive Magic, despite receiving other support over the years, especially in Theros block and Amonkhet block, but there have been plenty of Minotaurs that have left their mark on the game. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the Minotaur creature type or be capable of making a Minotaur creature token. In all, there were 107 cards eligible for this list, and in this video, we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, this includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it is Blood Rage Brawler. This 2-mana 4/3 boasts impressive stats, but it does come with a downside. You have to discard a card when it enters the battlefield. It saw a bit of play in standard mono-red aggro decks alongside Hazaret the Fervent, who liked you to be out of cards in hand anyway, and it also has a single top 8 from a modern Vengevine deck, which features Vengevine and other creatures who like being put in the graveyard. It hasn't gained any points since 2018 though, and it doesn't look super likely that that's going to change anytime soon. At number 9, it is Gnarled Scarhide. For most of Magic's history, a 1-mana 2/1 was basically guaranteed to see at least a little bit of play, even if it came with a downside. It just makes for a great 1-drop in aggro decks, and while the Scarhide does have one of those downsides, it can't block, it also comes with a tiny bit of upside. It has Bestow. This means you can stick it on a creature as an aura that gives +2/+1 and makes it so it can't block. While the Scarhide was almost always cast as a 1-mana 2/1, this additional mode was pretty nice and could sometimes even be used to get a blocker out of the way so you could swing for lethal. While in Standard it was played in mono-black aggro decks, and it hasn't gained any points since rotating out of the format. At number 8, it is Grizzly Survivor. This 3-mana 2/3 likes it when you discard a card or cycle, gaining +2/+0 until end of turn every time you do. For the first several years of its existence, it didn't see play anywhere. But in 2021, it became an important part of a Pauper deck that specialized in discarding and cycling a bunch of cards. This deck, which is built around Songs of the Damned and Reaping the Graves, seeks to cycle a bunch of creatures quickly to load the graveyard, with creatures while also ripping through the library for copies of Songs of the Damned. Then it can cast Songs of the Damned multiple times and use all that mana to make the storm count go up, before casting Reaping the Graves and getting those creatures back, and then cycling them all away again and winning the game with a Grizzly Survivor that has triggered dozens of times. Grizzly Survivor is likely to gain more points in Pauper. At number 7, it is Talroom Minotaur, the oldest card to make the list. It is simply a 4-mana 3/3 with haste. Not exactly an exciting stat line by today's standards, but in Mirage block constructed, the Minotaur was one of the better creatures. That goes a long way towards illustrating how bad creatures used to be. It showed up in the format's red and black-red aggro decks. It won't ever gain any more points even with a standard legal reprint, as it just isn't good enough by today's standards when we receive 4-mana 3/3s with haste that have upside. At number 6, it is Slaughter Priest of Mogis. This 2-mana 2/2 gets +2/+0 whenever you sacrifice a permanent. And you can pay 2 and sacrifice a creature or enchantment to give it first strike until end of turn. In other words, the ability effectively gives it +2/+0 and first strike. First strike pairs well with that ability, of course, because the higher its power goes, the harder it is for your opponent to effectively block it. It was played in some versions of the Rakdos Sacrifice deck in Standard, which ran a lot of additional payoffs for sacrificing things, like Mayhem Devil, but it wasn't a regular feature in the deck. Otherwise, it would have way more points because that deck found a ton of success in Standard, Historic, and Pioneer. The Slaughter Priest hasn't gained any points since 2020. At number 5, it is Flurry of Horns. This 5-mana sorcery creates 2/3 Minotaur tokens with haste. That is not a super impressive rate in most formats, but the Flurry has been played in Pauper, a format where only commons are legal. It used to be featured in that format's blue-red control decks, where the Minotaur tokens were actually the deck's main win condition. Once you had made the game go long and stopped everything your opponent had tried to do, you would cast the Flurry for a fairly quick clock. It hasn't gained any points since 2017. At number 4, it is Fanatic of Minotaurs. When this 4-mana 4/2 Minotaur enters the battlefield, it does damage to your opponent equal to your devotion to red. If the Fanatic is all alone, that means it does 1 damage, but obviously the goal is to get your devotion a lot higher than that so you can finish off an opponent. It was played in standard red devotion decks, which exclusively ran permanents that added 2 or more to your devotion, like Burning Tree, Emissary, Ash Zealot, and Hammer of Perforos. Fanatic of Minotaurs gained all of its points in Standard between 2013 and 2014. At number 3, it is Deadshot Minotaur. This 5-mana 3/4 Minotaur does 3 damage to a flyer when it enters the battlefield. That certainly isn't impressive, but importantly, it also has cycling. Cycling is a great mechanic in general as it allows you to get rid of a card you don't need for something else, but the decks that have played the Minotaur have really sought to abuse the mechanic. Deadshot Minotaur has gained all of its points in Extended and Modern Living Index, which look to cycle away a bunch of overcosted creatures before casting a card with Cascade like Violent Outburst. The way the deck is constructed, there's only 1 card in it that you'll cascade into, and that's Living End, which you get to cast reanimating all of the creatures you cycled away and destroying all the creatures your opponent has in play. While the Minotaur might not be efficient, it coming into play for free from the graveyard certainly is, especially when it brings other cycled creatures along with it. Deadshot Minotaur is likely to continue to gain points going forward. At number 2, it is Boros Reckoner. This Minotaur is a 3-mana 3/3, and anytime it gets damaged, it does that much damage to any target. This means if your opponent wants to trade for this in combat or use a burn spell on it, you're going to get a 2-for-1, since the Reckoner can do at least 3 damage to something else. It gained all of its points in block in Standard, mostly in red aggro decks, including alongside Fanatic of Minotaurs, for whom it provided a massive 3 devotion boost. One of the nastier things people did in the format was combine the Reckoner with Blasphemous Act, since it would usually wipe the board and do 13 damage to your opponent, which isn't something they're going to be able to come back from. It doesn't gain any points since rotating out of Standard. And at number 1, it's On-Crop Crasher. This Minotaur is a 3-mana 3/2 with haste, and it can exert itself to make a creature unable to block until end of turn. The Minotaur was great for standard aggro decks, which of course loved efficient hasty creatures and the ability to get a blocker out of the way, as it usually means a lot more than just the Minotaur is getting through for damage. Mono red aggro decks were fairly dominant in Amonkhet Standard, and the Crasher was a big part of that, even after the deck had a few of its key cards banned, like Ramunap Ruins. All of this allowed the Crasher to compile 59 points in Standard. It's also seen a little bit of play in Pioneer Mono Red, but it doesn't have any points there since 2020. While it's been idle for a while, that can be said for most of the cards on this list, so it doesn't look very likely that it will lose its spot at the top of this list anytime soon. So, those are the 10 Minotaurs that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these cards, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past videos, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.